Good morning, everyone. How you doing today? Whether you're here in the venues, I'd like you to take your program, please, and follow along. We're in a series entitled Visioneering, talking about how we sense God speaking to us about the vision and the purpose for our life, how we live our lives in a way that honors Him, and how we can see God do His purpose and will in us and through us. Today we're going to talk about taking inventory, how you look at what resources are available and what to look for as you approach vision. But let's go back and review a little bit about last week. We talked last week about the God of how. How is never a problem for God. God always has all the resources He needs. God has all the things that He needs to accomplish in your life, the vision He places in you. How is not the issue. We are the issue. Our willingness to be obedient, our willingness to do what God has called us to do. And so we have 20 building blocks we're talking about. Last week was number 5. And that building block is this. What God originates, He orchestrates. What God originates, He orchestrates. If God places something on your heart, He will bring it to fruition. If God has placed in you a vision, if God has given you a purpose that is a God-ordained vision, a God-ordained purpose, He will accomplish that. His purpose will be accomplished in you. And you don't have to worry about how it's going to happen. You don't have to worry about the resources being available, because if God originates it, He will orchestrate it. He will do what He has promised to do. And it all comes about because He's working for good in our life. And our text that is the anchor text for this entire series comes from Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10. It says, "For we are God's masterpiece. He's created us anew in Christ Jesus so we can do the good things He planned for us long ago." He planned long ago for your purpose. He planned long ago the vision that He's placing in your heart and life. And so this morning we're going to talk about the idea of taking inventory. In comedy, timing is everything. You can say funny stuff, but it's a whole lot funnier if the timing is perfect. I'm going to go way old school here, okay, way back. Do you remember Jack Benny? Now, some of you do. Most of you have this blank stare on your face. But I'm old enough to remember the old black and whites and the Jack Benny show. And Jack Benny was the master of timing. He would say something, and then he would put his hand like this and just wait and wait and wait. And then when the crowd was cracking up, he would say one more thing. And it would just send the place up in smoke. He was the master of timing. I don't know of anything more frustrating than when you're having a conversation and you want to tell them a story and somebody who knows the story steps on the punchline. You know, there are moments, I love my wife dearly, but there are moments when she steps all over what I want to say. And I just feel like throwing my hands up and going, "What's the use? You tell it." Timing is essential. And sometimes, in fact, most of the time, when it comes to vision, timing is at the heart of it. And how we communicate our vision is essential, and the timing of that. Because there are times when we can do things too fast. There are phrases we use for that. We talk about spilling the beans. Okay? We talk about the idea of letting the cat out of the bag. And the phrase I just used, we step on the punchline. But the fact is, we have a tendency to overshare. When God begins to stir something in our heart, when God begins to speak vision to us, when God begins to deal with us about what He wants to do in us and through us, oftentimes we can't help but tell somebody. The problem is, at times, it's TMI. Too much information. Because they're not at the place in the process that you are. And there needs to be these moments where God speaks to you individually. When God speaks to you in the quietness of your own spirit, and He is doing some things that He wants to do in you and through you before you share it with someone else. When God says something to your heart, know that the timing for you to share that is crucial. And this morning we're going to look at a building block that helps us understand how crucial it is to have the right timing in sharing what God is speaking to us about. So here's the building block for the morning. Walk before you talk. Investigate before you initiate. Walk before you talk. Investigate before you initiate. Nehemiah didn't ride in Jerusalem and say, hey, we're having a town meeting. Come on down. You're never going to guess what I'm going to do. We're going to rebuild these walls. We're going to have ourselves a good old time, and we're going to accomplish what we've been waiting 70 years to do. Now, that was in his heart, but he didn't TMI. He didn't share too much about it. He needed to investigate a few things before he moved forward on the vision God had given him. Why is that important? Well, understand this. Not everyone will be as excited about your vision as you are. Not everyone will grasp what God is dealing with your heart about in the same way you are sensing it. And we have a tendency to judge whether something's of God or not by the way people respond and react. If they're not prepared to hear what God is saying to you, then they're not going to react the way you expect them to react. And their lack of enthusiasm can affect us. You see, if we are taking the temperature of everybody else around us and we are looking for their response as to whether this is a God thing or not, we are missing the point. We need to sense God speaking to us. And if God is speaking to us, if we share it within the right time frame, when the time, in due season, then it will respond and resound in the hearts and lives of others. To share vision prematurely makes it much more difficult. To share vision prematurely about what God is talking to you about creates some obstacles that don't need to be there. To be successful, you have to, and this is what we're going to talk about today, do the due diligence. You got to do the due diligence. Jesus said it this way: if someone's going to build a tower, don't they count the cost before they begin so they know whether they can complete it or not? That just makes sense. You got to do some fact-finding. You've got to inform yourself, because you've got to be the expert on your vision. When God's speaking to you about something, you better know more about it than anyone else. And there's going to be questions that rise. And you need to seek God for the answers to those questions. You can't outsource that process. You can't give that somebody else to do the due diligence for you. There are some things you need to find out for yourself. And it needs to be done in the quietness of your own spirit as you deal with God about what He's speaking to you. That's what Nehemiah did. Nehemiah chapter 2, verses 11 through 16. It's in your notes this morning. So I arrived in Jerusalem. 3 days later, I slipped out during the night, taking only a few others with me. I'd not told anyone about the plans God had put in my heart for Jerusalem. Now think about that. They've been in Jerusalem 3 days. He says, guys, we're going for a ride tonight. And they think to themselves, what? What's this all about? He hadn't shared anything with anybody. Think about that. It had been months in the palace as he prepared, and then he shared it with the king, and the king gave him the authority to go. And then on the whole long trip from Babylon to Jerusalem, he didn't say a word about why he was coming. And once he got there, he says, okay, guys, let's go for a ride tonight. We took no pack animals with us except the donkey I was riding. After dark, I went out through the valley gate, past the jackal's well, and over the dung gate to inspect the broken walls and the burned gates. Then I went to the fountain gate and the king's pool, but my donkey couldn't get through the rubble. So though it was still dark, I went up to the Kidron Valley instead, inspecting the wall before I turned back and enter again at the valley gate. The city officials did not know I'd been out there or what I'd been doing, for I had not yet said anything to anyone about my plans. I had not yet spoken to the Jewish leaders, the priests, the nobles, the officials, or anyone else in the administration. Okay? What Nehemiah is saying here is that there is a time in the process where you quietly go about the due diligence of sensing God speaking His purpose and will to your life. That's between you and God. That is in the quietness of your own spirit. You begin to investigate before you initiate. Behind the scenes, there was a quiet phase, and he took that ride to get some answers. And ultimately, that ride confirmed his vision. Now, the problem is too often we announce our vision before we do the investigation. We say, God's going to do this, and we don't know what the real scope of the issue is. Now, does that mean God is not in it? No. But it's not wisdom. And sometimes it makes the process harder because you have opposition from the get-go. Because the moment you begin to share your vision, you open it up for commentary, discussion, criticism. And if you don't have the answers, you may find your vision beginning to die. Great example of that. Joseph. Remember the story of Joseph? The most beloved son of his father, who God spoke great visions to about how he would rise with power and authority and how he would affect the entire world. Well, you know what Joseph did? He told his brothers. TMI. Too much information. He said, do you know that God is going to raise me up? And I had a dream last night. You were all sheaves in the field, and I was the tallest sheaf in the field, and everybody bowed to me. And I can hear his brother saying, oh yeah, twerp? You think so? Well, Joseph shared that vision. And immediately, he faced opposition. And his brothers took him by force, threw him in a pit, sold him to slave traders, and they went to Egypt. And I'll bet there were moments as Joseph sat in Potiphar's house where he said, you know, maybe I was a little premature in sharing my vision. And there were moments when he sat in prison, when he wondered whether the vision would ever come true. He'd shared it, but now it looked like a pipe dream. To Joseph's credit, when his brothers came to Egypt to be fed, and he was now in a position of authority, he kept quiet until the right time. So timing is crucial and essential. Because in the investigation stage, there are three things that happen. And they're all important things. And we need to understand what they are about. First of all, the vision is confirmed. Okay? One of the things that happens in this process of investigation, God confirms vision to you. One of the great stories in the Bible is the process of the children of Israel going from Egypt to the Promised Land. Now, it's not a long trip. It takes maybe 25, 30 days to take that many people across. But because of their lack of belief, they spent 40 years in the desert. And it all hinged around a lack of vision. When Moses brought the people for the first time to the edge of the promised land, he sent out 12 spies. And those spies went in, and they saw a land, as they quoted, it is flowing with milk and honey. It is a place where things grow phenomenally. There's water, there is timber, there's all kinds of stuff. But there are great walled cities, and there are giants in the land, and we can't do it. And the lack of faith, the lack of vision of 10 of the 12 spies sent more than 1 million people back into the desert for 40 years, so an entire generation of unbelief would die out. What we forget is that the next time they came to the edge of the promised land, now led by Joshua, the promise is still the same. God said, this is your land. I'm going to give it to you. It's my land of promise. It's a land flowing with milk and honey. It's a great land. The promises are still the same. The only difference is the people and their vision. And you know what's interesting about it? Joshua repeated what Moses did. He sent in some spies. Now, he didn't send in 12, and I think he picked a little better. But those guys went in. And they came back with a report. Joshua chapter 2, verse 22. When they left, they went into the hills and stayed there for 3 days until the pursuers had searched all along the road and returned without finding them. Then the 2 men started back. They came down out of the hills, forded the river, came to Joshua, son of Nun, and told him everything that had happened to them. They said to Joshua, the Lord has surely given the whole land into our hands. All the people are melting in fear because of us. Wow. Same land, same giants, same wall cities, different kind of vision. The vision was confirmed. And as you investigate, as you look at what God is speaking to you about, if God is in it, there will be a sense of confirmation that comes and gives you just the deep, abiding peace that God is with you. Because ultimately, a God-ordained vision is impossible by human standards, by human means. If you can do it yourself, why do you need God? If you can accomplish it on your own, what part does God play in it? But if it's a God thing, if it's a God-ordained vision for your life, there will be a faith aspect to the process. And as you investigate, there will be a moment when in your spirit there is a confirmation. And it might be a word from somebody. It might be someone who comes on board. It might be a resource that comes to bear. It could be any number of things. But in that moment, you know that you know that you know. Because what God originates, He orchestrates. And if you've walked and investigated before you initiate, you give God time to confirm in you. Now, a second thing that can happen is your vision gets defined. Not only can it be confirmed, it can be defined. Because oftentimes vision starts with these huge idea. And through the process of investigation, you begin to focus and narrow. And just like a laser is more powerful as a concentrated light, so a vision becomes more powerful the more focused it becomes. And you begin to sense the action steps. You begin to know what the resources are that are needed. Now, what happened with Nehemiah is that as he looked at the scale and scope of the project, the size of the wall, he understood that the footprint needed to be shrunk. For him to really safely wall in the city, he couldn't go out to where it had been before. He had to narrow the scale and focus. So the footprint became smaller. his vision became more defined. And one of the interesting things is that oftentimes we think that there's only one way to accomplish what God has laid on our heart. That's not true. There are very few destinations that only have one point of access. God is the master of coming at things from another direction. It was not God's will or purpose for us to sin. It was not God's will or purpose for us to be born and shaped in iniquity. But God redeemed us through the work of his Son, Jesus. He is the master of coming from a different direction. And God wants to come and do his work in you and through you. And you've got to be open that the initial dream may not be the final dream, may not be the final vision. There may be another way to do it. And the investigation process helps you define your vision. The third thing is that vision can be aborted. Just like, there have been several times when I've been down in Florida, just about the time that they sent up one of the shuttles. And I was down there one time when they put it off and aborted the mission 3 different times because of weather. Now, there are times when what you are sensing and what you are feeling and what you are thinking, once you have closer inspection of it, you understand it's not a God idea, it's just a good idea. And it's not a vision. It may be a good and noble purpose. It may be something that is worthy of your effort, but you fully understand and realize this thing is not of God. And there is wisdom in stopping and saying, you know what? We're not going forward right now. It's not time. And you need to know, one of the issues that we've been wrestling with in this series of messages is, how do you know something is a God thing rather than just a good thing? This investigation process, the spending, the due diligence of praying and believing and trusting and looking at the issues, help you clarify whether it's from God or not. Because oftentimes we get caught up in the passion of the moment. We get caught up in the opportunity. Just because something is an opportunity doesn't mean it's from God. Commercials are all opportunities. It doesn't mean it's from God. Just because somebody says, I'll give you a great deal on a car down at the car dealership, doesn't mean you ought to go buy a car today. Now, it may be, but it may not be. Opportunity is not necessarily vision. You've got to know when God is speaking. And that's where wisdom comes in. When you realize something is either of God, or God gives permission for it, or if it's not of God. And there are moments in your life when, as you investigate, you'll realize that this is not a God vision. It's a good thing. It may be a noble thing. But it's not the vision that will drive your life. And so, when we face these issues, vision is either confirmed, it's defined, or it's aborted. And we look for what God is saying to us in a different and new way. And in all of that, timing is crucial. Timing is crucial. The right plan with the right resources at the right time is God-ordained vision. And everything about it works. Baseball season's coming. I'm excited. I'm ever the optimist in January and February and March. The games start in April. Reality begins to set in. And right now, the Mariners could be a championship quality team. Right now. April 15th, maybe not. They might be 6 games out of first place, 7 games in. But the fact is, Hope springs eternal. And in baseball, timing is what it's all about. The most beautiful sound in baseball is the crack of the bat as a guy hits a home run. And if you've been to enough baseball games, you know the sound is different. It sounds like a rifle shot. There's a sweetness to it. There's a purity to it. And I've been sitting there in the stands with my head down, eating popcorn or something, and all of a sudden I hear that sound. And I'll turn to Tina or whoever I'm sitting with, and I go, that's a home run. Because you can tell by the sound. Why can you tell by the sound? Because a 95-mile-an-hour fastball is being met by a 33-ounce wood bat being swung by a guy with large forearms and biceps. And he hits it at the exact point of contact. The timing is perfect. He strikes out if he swings too early. He strikes out if he swings too late. He pops out if he swings under. He grounds out if he swings over. He hits a line drive for a base hit if he hits it square. But if he hits it just under the center of the ball, and the timing of the bat meets the speed of the pitch, it goes in an arc. It goes maybe 120 feet in the air and 400 feet out into center field. And this year, it doesn't have to go quite as far because they're bringing the fences in. Hallelujah. We've been praying for that for years. Timing is crucial because timing marries the external elements. There are elements and resources there to help you accomplish the vision God has put in your heart. And there will be things that come together, and externally you will see them begin to focus in. Then there are internal elements. What God has done in you, what God has spoken to you. You are prepared, you are ready, you are on board, you are full of faith to do what God has called you to do. So the external meets the internal, which meets the eternal elements. God's timing is perfect. And you move from a good idea and what you can do and what you can accomplish to knowing that God is with you. God spoke through his angel to Mary and said, you're going to be the mother of the Messiah. And she kept these and treasured it in her heart. But then after the baby was born, word began to get out. And the first to hear were the shepherds. And in the book of Luke, it tells us that they hurried off and found Mary and Joseph and the baby who was lying in a manger. And when they had seen him, they spread the word concerning what had been told them about the child. And all who heard were amazed at what the shepherds said to them. But Mary treasured up all these things and pondered them in her heart. The shepherds returned, glorifying and praising God for all the things they'd heard and seen, which were just as they had been told. There is an eternal element within the process of visioneering. In the fall of 1998, I was unemployed. And we had been in the process of talking to the leadership of this church about interviewing. And we had not quite yet reached the stage where we've been asked to present our name to be voted on to become the pastor of the church. Now, I have to be honest with you, it was a desperate time in our lives. We'd been unemployed at that moment for somewhere in the area of 4.5 months. There is a certain focus that comes from unemployment. A certain kind of desperation that was in you. But we had a sense that God was with us. And we came over and interviewed with the pulpit committee. That was quite an interview. 20, 25 people sat around, asked questions. When we came to the end of the interview, Tina, they said, do you have any questions for us? And Tina just piped up because this was in her heart. She goes, where are we at in the process? Now, I've been in ministry all these years, and I have been part of interview processes. And our hope was that we were the one candidate that people were looking at, and we could move from there. And much to our dismay, Don Kwame, who was the chairman of the committee, said to us, well, we have interviewed 4 pastoral candidates, and you're the 4th. And over the next few days, we'll make a decision about how we will progress. It was wonderful that we had had the opportunity to present our vision. But now we were in a place where we didn't know quite what the next step would be. And I had a sense inside, and I had not really shared it with Tina that much, but I had a real sense that this was the place. We had done some investigation. Once we began to talk with the leadership of this church, we made some trips over to this area and began to become acquainted with the community, because we'd never lived in this community before. We were unfamiliar with it. And we began to drive Meridian, and we began to drive Pacific, and we began to go out to Gem Heights, and we began to go to Spanaway and other different places, and we began to pray. And there just came a sense in my spirit that God was marrying this congregation with us. Now, not everybody had that same vision at that moment. We were still in process. Early in December, we went over to visit a great church in the Kirkland area, City Church. And we have some friends who had been part of our church that we had pastored in Yakima, who we ran into at the service. And they said, hey, come with us and have lunch. Well, I'm thinking to myself, I'm broke. I don't have money for lunch. And then he said the magic words, I'll pay. I say, great. So there we went. And this family had been praying for us. We sat in a restaurant in the Redmond area, and he said, what's happening? And for the first time, I began to articulate a vision for this church. I had not yet been asked to present my ministry. I had not yet been asked to become the pastor of this church. But God was stirring something in my heart and life. And I shared it with him. And he looked across the table at me. And he said, Cal, I believe God's in that. I believe that God is calling you to that place. And he said, I want to plant some seed in that. And he pulled out his checkbook and he wrote a check, turned it over and slipped it across the table to me. And I picked it up and put it in my pocket. I really wanted to look at it. But I put it in my pocket. And before we left, he said, our prayers will be that this vision you have for that church will be accomplished. Now, it was Christmas time. I was unemployed. 3 girls. We didn't know where Christmas was coming from. I got out to the car and let a reasonable amount of time pass. And I pulled the check out. And it was for $2,000. I turned to Tina and I said, we're going to have Christmas. But more importantly, at that moment, the vision for Sound Life Church in Cal Carpenter was confirmed. And from that moment on, I have never doubted God's call. I have never doubted that I am where He wants me to be, and I am doing what He wants me to do. Because God will do what He has promised to do. Your final point for the morning, simply this. With a God-ordained vision, there is no rush. There's no rush. God is never in a hurry, but He is always on time. Would you bow your heads with me this morning? Lord, we thank You for Your word, which again reminds us that You are faithful. And God, what You have called us to do, You will accomplish within us. And God, I pray in these moments that You would help us to understand that You are calling us to things that are beyond what we can do in our natural strength. You are calling us to a vision that is greater than ourselves. God, help us to let these things take root deeply in our heart so that we can be in the right time, in the right place, doing the right thing.